Hey everyone, I'm Casey Hughes, your host of Spirecast, where we bring conversations to help you thrive in ministry. Today, we are going to be talking with Casey Tygrett about his new book, The Gift of Restlessness. I know you've got two Caseys on today, so we're going to try to make it as least confusing as possible, but it's going to be a powerful one. Casey Tygrett has also been involved in the work of spiritual formation for nearly 25 years. He has held various positions in churches, seminaries, and parachurch organizations. Casey is the author of Becoming Curious, As I Recall, and his newest book, The Gift of Restlessness. Currently, he is the Director of Spiritual Direction at Soul Care and Theologian in Residence at Parkview Christian Church, located in the south suburbs of Chicago. Welcome to Spirecast, Casey. We are so excited to have you on today.
Thank you so much. It is my privilege, my pleasure, and to meet another Casey.
Another
We need to
Casey.
stick together.
Yes, this is going to be fun. Like I said before, hopefully not too confusing for people
Yeah.
in the next 30 minutes. But thank you for joining us. Let's just go ahead and jump right in on the topic of restlessness, part of your new book that you're releasing. Most people probably don't think of restlessness as a gift. So what led you to write a book about restlessness, and why would you say we should see this as a gift?
Yeah, there's a few factors that went into the book. One of the biggest was the shared experience I think we've all had from 2020 to 2021, 22. Not just the changes that came with the pandemic, but also everything that happened in that period of time, socially, politically, even within the church. So those contributed a lot. So that universal piece, but also the particulars of things that happened in my own life in that critical time that we're testing and challenging. And the book is filled with a lot of stories about and reflections on what those things were and why they played such a big role. The other piece is I have always kind of been a restless person.
Mm,
And I think books in a lot of ways are people trying to make sense of the things that are happening in their life, either their life in relationships or personally or spiritually, their life with God. And so all three of those things contributed to me bringing this book out into the world. And it was written once before. So I had a version of this book before 2020 that was I had put away for a while and came back to it after seeing everything that had happened in those couple of years, just because there were new stories to tell and there were new insights and perspectives that I had on the idea of restlessness. And what I found was because the work of spiritual formation is a lot of times finding the ways that difficult or challenging situations actually transform us and
mm,
help us to grow. Something like restlessness, that if you bring it up in a crowd of people, and maybe even people who are watching this are like, no, I don't want any part of that. Whatever I have to do to avoid or escape or go around that, whenever you have something like that, it is always an opportunity to grow. And so rather than seeing it as an enemy or a villain, what if we saw it as a gift?
mm,
And what if it allowed us to see our life with God, self, and others in some really new and powerful ways? And so that was the hope I had. And when you call the book The Gift of Restlessness, you really had better have some energy on the back end of that as to why you would say that. And that's really why, is
yeah,
because I could see some things that are very, very good
mm,
and helpful, even in the midst of something that seems like the total opposite of that.
mm. That's great. I think anytime we pair things with, we learned this in 2020, I think people have a different response altogether. But you're right, calling it a gift. We're going to really hope people lean in right now and say, I want to discover more about how this can be a gift to me, because I believe we all experienced a degree of restlessness over
Yeah.
the last few years as so much changed for us.
And that's the hard part is I didn't want to write a quote unquote pandemic book, and I don't nobody wants to read, like, I'll even watch shows that try to bring in that element. I'm like, I don't really want to watch this.
We don't want to
Ho-
relive it.
However, there's very few things that we're going to talk about in the
Mm,
next 5 to 10 years that won't have that as like a background,
right.
as a either a background character or just a subtext underneath. And especially in the terms of spiritual growth and transformation, that story, those experiences are going to have a long run and long ripples that go into our life for quite a while. So, as much as I didn't want to write a pandemic book, I couldn't write a book after 2020 that didn't factor that in, or at
Oh,
least.
for sure. It's gonna be helpful, I know it is, and, you talked a little bit about personal stories that you've been able to pull into this book too, and you write about the story of your daughter being in the hospital, and you
Mm.
contrast it with watching in a home rehab show while you were in the lobby, and you said in the book, page 11, "I suppose that's why we love those fantasy worlds. We meet people who are so disengaged from our own restlessness that we can join them outside the fray." Why do you think these distractions from restlessness are so appealing to us?
I think there's a couple reasons that they're so appealing. One is the human race has always preferred fantasy to reality,
Mm,
because it's always the best version of what could be.
yeah.
And there are some ways in which that's healthy and helpful. That's what vision really is. We talk about casting a vision. All a vision is a preferred version or vision of reality. And so there's a sense in which the best part of it is really good and the bad part of it is really bad, which is escapism and leaving behind what's right in front of us. And the other thing is the nature of restlessness is that I talk about in the book how it means we can't go back to the way things were before,
Mm,
but we also have no idea what it means to go forward. And so
yeah.
we're really stuck in the present tense with what's 5 feet in front of our face. And a good fantasy, a good escape allows us to step out of that present tense and kind of live up here or over here. Restlessness engages that fight or flight in us. So we
Mm,
either muscle up or we medicate and distract, or we just give into it to cynicism and despair and all that. And so fantasies really feels really good when you're in the middle of a present tense that you don't want to be a part of, that
mm,
you know you can't change. You can't go back to the way it was before. But what happens next? I was sitting there and I had no idea. I'm holding a clipboard filling out paperwork for my daughter, and I'm watching this TV in the corner. And this lovely couple is trying to choose whether they want subway tile backsplash or something else. And I thought, what a
mm,
strange world.
yeah.
Here I am. I can't go back to the 25 minutes before we ended up here. And these folks are really concerned about what's going to look like behind their sink.
Mm,
And it was a different kind of crisis, quote unquote, a different
yeah.
kind of drama that allowed me to step out if I wanted to.
Right.
I'd like to say that I didn't fully lean in and go, huh, I wonder what they'll pick. Uh, but that's the hard part of a fantasy is it's just so appealing sometimes.
Yes, yes. I think a lot of people will resonate with that, especially pastors and church leaders. We face a unique kind of restlessness in ministry. From your work in spiritual direction and as a pastor yourself, how would you describe some of the restlessness that you see spiritual leaders facing?
Well, the biggest part is it comes from compassion.
Mm,
I believe that restlessness is one of the most common human experiences, and so pastors are we're always in the posture of feeling with people. That compassion literally means to feel with and to be moved for people. And so the challenge in ministry is when we see the restlessness of others, and how do we feel with them, knowing that the solution to what they're facing a lot of times isn't a solution at all, but it's, can I just wait with you in the middle of this,
mm,
and we'll figure out what happens next. But how do we stay here and learn from this restlessness? And in the meantime, there is the restlessness in the heart of the pastor in terms of what am I called to do here?
yeah,
What is my purpose? And what about my, as our faith grows and as we experience challenges, questions we can't answer,
yeah.
questions we'd like to answer, but we don't even know how to ask. And when things like faith reconstruction and deconstruction happen for people who are in ministry, there's a restlessness in us around, can I do this? Can I actually do this and stay faithful to the people that I'm serving? Can I do this and continue to teach? Can I do this? And so it brings us to that place where I can't not ask the questions I'm asking. I can't go back to before I thought that.
Yeah.
but I don't know what this is going to look like to try and work with these things. And
Mm.
so one of the things I do is, as a spiritual director, my goal is to provide a safe space for people to do that so
Mm.
they can remain in their restlessness in the middle of ministry, but also be able to process through some of those big questions. And then there are more. There are universal questions about the place of the church in the world, and how do we respond to culture and the culture around us? How do we respond to crisis and conflict when we have people who just want to tell us that we're wrong all the time? There's a restlessness there too. Like, I can't I can't refuse this because I want to be humble enough to receive,
Yeah.
critique. But I also, what is the long term on this, and how long can I really deal with the
Right.
pressure and the conflict and the criticism that I've been taking? So it goes in all sorts of different directions from a pastoral and from a ministry standpoint.
And as you said, this is a very personal thing to you. This is something you've grappled with over the years, and putting this together is personal to you. And you've been transparent about your own restlessness. So, what advice would you give to pastors in using their own restlessness as a gift to maybe help their congregations navigate following Jesus?
Yeah. I think the thing that animates this book, and that I hope people get from it, is giving ourselves permission and normalizing restlessness as just a part of the spiritual life, rather than an aberration or something that we should avoid, or a dysfunction.
Mm.
It really is part of it. If you look at the arc of the stories in scripture, of every quote unquote hero that's been brought to the surface and brought to the front, there's always some kind of wilderness experience that they have. Whether it's Moses, out in the wilderness tending sheep, or Abraham leaving behind his father and his familiarities and his family, or Joseph getting tossed in the well. There's always a story of a place where someone is in between. They don't
Yeah.
know what the future looks like, but the past is no longer able to. So it's always been part of the spiritual journey. And so being able to just normalize that and say, yeah, restlessness is part of what it means to have a life with God, self, and others. I think starting there allows a lot of the other pieces to really emerge without as much work. If
Mm.
we don't allow ourselves to say, this is just normal and this is part of the journey and there's goodness in the middle of it, everything else becomes much harder. We're expending a lot of energy that we don't necessarily have to. The other thing that I would say is, if you are experiencing a kind of restlessness, don't try to do that by yourself. There are wonderful people in what I would call third spaces, so not your family and not your ministry context, but outside of that, spiritual directors, guides who would be willing to sit with you and walk with you. That's been really helpful for me in restless times, is just to have some folks who are outside of my normal circle, who are willing to sit with me and let me talk through the stuff that I don't want to talk through in circumstances where there are people that I lead, or there are people who would be frightened by the kind of questions or
Mm.
thoughts that I was having. So having that safe third person
Yeah.
walk with you. So once we normalize it, and once we have someone else who's walking with us, then it really gets into the particulars.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that the book has within it is a backbone or a framework based on the Lord's Prayer.
Mm.
And I think there are some very specific questions that the Lord's Prayer responds to, that are the restless questions we all ask. Things like, where do I belong? What's my purpose?
Mm.
Is there going to be enough? Will there be enough food, money, energy, resources, relationships? Can the world be mended? Especially for those of us in ministry, that question, can any of this, forgiveness is that thing we want the most and the
Mm.
thing we believe is least likely to happen
Mm.
sometimes.
Yeah.
So, can the world be mended? Will I be safe? Can I be rescued from the junk that I get into? Those are the really key human experiences of restlessness. And so, as we're going through those times, trying to figure out which of those questions are most important to us.
Mm.
Am I restless because I don't think there's going to be enough? because I don't know that this is my purpose anymore. People who are going through times of I just don't know that the local church is where God is inviting me to stay. That's a key question.
Yeah.
And if it isn't that, then where do I go from there? So those three things are really helpful in times of restlessness, at least from my perspective.
That's great. I know when this airs, it will be, the week after Easter, which is a huge week for so many ministry leaders who are going to be listening right now. Is there a distinction between restlessness and tiredness? And if so, can you kind of describe what some might be coming off of a busy week, feeling fatigued, tired? Is restlessness this bigger idea? And how do you know which one you're experiencing?
Hmm. Yeah, I think rest is really addressing tiredness is really addressing more of a feeling. Um, Not that restlessness isn't a feeling, but it's more about the state of our body and our mind. And what I've noted is that tiredness typically diminishes with how much rest we can get. So whether it's sleep or whether it's just shutting down, staying off the email for a while, staying out of those creative zones or task oriented zones for a little bit, allowing ourselves to rest. I think that's a distinction between restlessness, which is kind of a state of life. Restlessness I feel like it has a longer run to it, and it has a bigger, our body's included in it. Our physicality and whether or not we're feeling tired is probably part of it, but there's a whole host of other things that go along with it. For example, you could get off of a long, let's say you had multiple Easter services and it's Easter Monday and your body is really tired. And so you take a nap, you wake up, you're feeling a little better. But there's also this question you're walking with of how many more of those do I want to really feel like I'm called to do?
Hmm.
So I brought myself, my body, my mind to this point of tiredness. I've rested it now, but also with it is this question of is this really what I'm here for?
Hmm.
Or is this community where I'm really supposed to be doing this? That's a restlessness that's bigger than the body,
Right.
but it also has these other questions included. And I think one of the things you also notice is the difference between being tired and being weary.
Hmm.
Tired is typically handled well by unplugging, sleep, exercise, the right kind of food, that sort of thing. Weariness is a bone tired, it's a soul tired kind of thing.
Right.
It's that step right before burnout where we're hoarding energy, we're getting irritated by things that are so small that we never really got irritated by. And I think weariness often can be a bigger part in
Yeah.
the journey of a restless season.
Hmm. That's really, really helpful. And if anyone is feeling that weariness, they're feeling some restlessness and they're becoming a little overwhelmed, maybe they're listening to you talk and they're saying, oh my goodness, this is me right now. I am experiencing these things. What would you suggest they do? What are some practical things that they could begin doing right away?
Yeah, practical thing number one, among many, is just to name that and to be okay to make peace with it
Yeah.
and say this is what I'm feeling, this is what I'm experiencing. I'm not going to make any excuses for it. I'm not going to say yes, that's me, but the person at this other ministry or that person that I know, they've got way more on their plate. So not trying to equivocate it with other people, but simply owning it and saying, yeah, honestly, this is where I'm at. This is what I'm wrestling with and dealing with. And then finding, as I mentioned before, having that safe third person, whether it's a spiritual director. What we do at Soul Care is we have a team of spiritual directors who our job is to walk with people who are in that state of weariness, curiosity, starting to discern, is this the vocational place where I need to stay, or is it time to make a move? Uh, are my practice something? Sometimes it's about spiritual practices. In those seasons, going back to the practices that have had the most richness for you. So whether it's Sabbath rest, maybe you need a day during the week where you unplug for 8 hours.
Mm.
as much as you possibly can. And being able to use that time to talk with God about what is causing the restlessness I'm feeling. What are the questions that I need to ask or I need to explore in the middle of all this? And being able then to process that with someone who is safe enough that
Mm.
you don't feel like you're risking it all to talk to them, but also has the skill to be able to hold some silence. Sometimes those questions don't really need to be answered. We just need to sit with them. I think about David in Psalm 22, how long, O Lord, or about why, my God, why have you forsaken me? Other places in the Psalms where he says, how long, O Lord? And he's talking about waiting and waiting. Those questions don't ever get answered.
Right.
It's in the asking that he finds his way
Mm.
to the next thing or the next place or the presence that God brings. So being able to acknowledge those things, ask those questions in the presence of someone who's just going to be able to listen
Mhm.
and in a non-judgmental, non-anxious kind of way, open up that space for you.
That's so good. Where have you seen in your own restlessness, where it's been a gift, it's taking you from a place to a new place? Where can you give any examples of that?
Hmm. There's a few. I think, especially when it comes to one of the questions I talk about in the book, is a question of belonging,
Mm.
and where do we belong is often a big question that we're trying to answer.
Yeah.
Some people, and I think I'm probably in this group, don't know that I ever fully belong where I am.
Mm.
I just from a strict geographical standpoint, I grew up in southern West Virginia. I went to college in Ohio, and I've lived in Illinois now for almost 24 years. So, as far as where home is where I am with my family, which, depending on the era of my life that you asked me, is three different states and three
Mhm.
very different states. The culture of Southern West Virginia is not the culture of Chicagoland at all. There's similarities, but it's a very different place. And so, my restlessness about where do I belong led me to realize that at different stages of our life, I talk in the book about capital B belonging and lowercase b belonging.
Mm.
So there's this capital B belonging that's always true.
Yeah.
We are always ones created in the image of God, fearfully and wonderfully made, and we're called beloved. That's
Mm.
always true. Whether I'm in West Virginia, Ohio, or Illinois, that's my core central identity. That's who I belong to. But how I express that is different from place to place, and that's the lowercase b belonging. So whether I'm a senior pastor in central Illinois or an associate pastor in the suburbs of Chicago or a teaching pastor in the northern suburbs, role helps with that.
Mm.
As a father to a younger child versus a father to a teenager where I'm at now, those are two very different roles that I've belonged to. And so
Mm.
being able to explore the restlessness around, I just don't feel like I fit. What does that mean?
Yeah.
And will I ever feel that way? And if I don't, how do I make peace with that?
Yeah.
Or in certain theological communities, maybe there are people who are like, I'm the 1% in my church that believes blank.
Mm.
Will I ever really feel like I belong? Well, you always belong, capital B, to this very significant reality. But how you discover your lowercase belongings might look different over time. So that's been a gift that I've received, is just the freedom to figure that out
Yeah.
and know that as long as I'm investing myself and loving God and myself and others, there's a lot of freedom to figure out where I belong and what that really looks like.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you so much for sharing with us today, Casey. I wonder, is there anything more, either from the book or just, on this train of thought about the gift of restlessness? Is there anything more that you would want to share with ministry leaders who are listening?
I would just say that the reason this is worth exploring is because this is a point of connection that we will always have with the people we serve. Whether you're in children's or students or non for profit or missions or wherever you might be, restlessness is a common thing.
Mm.
And so the more we are able to navigate and explore and name our own, the more deeply we'll be able to connect with the people that we serve. And so just like I feel like soul health will help us to be better for the people we serve, so will, as part of our soul health, exploring this idea of our own restlessness will help us to connect better and serve better and walk more fully with the people that we serve. So if there's any encouragement towards reading another book, because I know this is not the first recommendation anybody has had today about a book to read, the value of it would be if you can find a way to be honest and careful and compassionate with your own restlessness, you'll find a connecting point with other people that may be the most valuable thing that you have to give to them.
I love that. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And if people want to follow up with you and they want to hear more about the book or about your ministry, where can they find you?
Two different places. One is just my website. It's my name, caseytygrett.com. But if you're part of an organization, a church or a parachurch organization, or you're an individual looking for soul health resources and spiritual direction, soulcare.com is the other place where you can find some of the work that we've been doing. And we'd love to talk with you about partnering with your church or partnering with you and what you need for your own soul health.
Love it. Love it. Thank you so much for joining us today, Casey. I know that you're going to help a lot of people through this and through your book. So we appreciate your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you guys so much.
Well, we want to also thank all of you who joined us today, and we want to remind you to register for the Spire Conference happening September 26th through the 28th in Nashville, Tennessee. You have until the end of April to register at the early registration price. So the Spire Conference has something for everyone on your team. You can register yourself and everyone on your team today at spire.network/Spire Conference. We will see you